Daniel Carter had learned early in life that being poor was not the same thing as being worthless. At 38 years old, Daniel lived alone in a tiny rented room above an old laundromat on the edge of the city. The room had one small window, a narrow bed, a second-hand table, and a heater that worked only when it felt like cooperating. The paint on the walls was peeling, and during heavy rain, water sometimes slipped through the ceiling into a plastic bucket Daniel kept beside his bed. But Daniel never complained. He had spent most of his adult life working jobs that other people barely noticed. He had unloaded delivery trucks, cleaned restaurant kitchens, repaired broken fences, washed dishes, carried boxes, shoveled snow, and worked long shifts at a warehouse. His hands were rough, his back often hurt, and his shoes had been repaired so many times that Daniel joked they had more stitches than his old winter coat. Still, every morning he woke before sunrise. He would sit on the edge of his bed, rub his tired eyes, and whisper the same words. Just make it through today. Then he would put on his work boots and leave. Daniel had once dreamed of owning a small house. Not a mansion, not an expensive car. Just a little home with a kitchen, a porch, and a table where people could sit together. But dreams become difficult to hold on to when life keeps taking things away. Years earlier, Daniel had been married to a woman named Emily. They had loved each other deeply. They had been young, hopeful, and convinced that as long as they stayed together, they could survive anything. Then Emily became sick. The medical bills came first. Then the missed work. Then the loans. Then the arguments. Daniel sold his car. He emptied his savings. He borrowed money from friends. He worked 2 jobs. But Emily's illness kept getting worse. One cold morning, she squeezed Daniel's hand from her hospital bed and said, "Promise me something." Daniel tried to smile. "Anything. Don't let this make you bitter." He looked away because he didn't want her to see him crying. Emily continued softly, "If you ever have nothing left, give whatever you can, even if it's only a smile. Promise me you won't stop being kind." Daniel nodded. "I promise." Emily died 3 weeks later. For a long time, Daniel felt as though someone had taken the future he had planned and erased it completely. But he remembered her final request. So he kept going. And whenever he could help someone, he did. Sometimes it was something small. He would buy coffee for a tired construction worker. He would leave a few coins beside a vending machine when he saw a child staring at it. He once gave his only umbrella to an elderly woman walking through a storm. People often told him he was crazy. "You can barely afford your own life," his coworker Marcus once said. "Why do you keep giving things away?" Daniel had simply smiled. "Because I know what it feels like to need something and have nobody there." That was Daniel. He didn't have much. But somehow, he always believed there was enough kindness to share. Then came the Friday that changed everything. Daniel had worked a 12-hour shift at a warehouse. His supervisor had cut overtime that week, which meant his paycheck was smaller than expected. When Daniel checked his wallet that evening, he found $1. Just one. He stared at the bill for several seconds. He had planned to use it for a small loaf of bread from the convenience store. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. His stomach hurt. The rain had begun falling outside, and the wind was getting stronger. Daniel pulled his old coat tighter around himself and started walking home. The streets were almost empty. Cars rushed past, splashing water onto the sidewalks. Streetlights reflected across puddles. People hurried beneath umbrellas, desperate to reach warm homes. Daniel walked slowly. He was exhausted. Then he heard a voice. "Excuse me." Daniel stopped. Across the street stood an elderly man. He looked about 70 years old. His gray hair was soaked with rain, and his clothes were thin and worn. He was standing beside a closed bus stop, holding a small paper bag against his chest. Daniel crossed the street. "Are you okay?" The old man looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me." The man swallowed. "I've been trying to get home, but I'm short $1 for the bus." Daniel's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket. He felt the single bill. His stomach growled. The old man noticed. "You need it too," he said. Daniel smiled. It's okay. No, the man said quickly. You don't understand. I just need enough to get home. Daniel looked at him. Something about the man's face reminded him of his own father. Daniel's father had died when Daniel was 22. He remembered the way his father used to wait outside the house whenever Daniel came home late. Rain or snow, he would always say the same thing. Come inside. You must be hungry. Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out the dollar. For a moment he stared at it. That dollar could buy bread, could quiet his stomach, could make tomorrow morning slightly easier. But then Daniel remembered Emily. If you ever have nothing left, give whatever you can. He extended his hand. Here. The old man stared at the bill. Then he stared at Daniel. You're giving me this? Daniel nodded. It's only $1. The man's eyes filled with tears. To you, maybe. Daniel smiled. Go home. The old man took the dollar. He held it tightly. Thank you. Daniel turned away. Wait. Daniel looked back. The stranger's voice trembled. What is your name? Daniel. My name is Samuel. Daniel nodded. Nice to meet you, Samuel. Then he walked away. Samuel watched him disappear into the rain. Daniel continued toward home with empty pockets and an empty stomach. He had no idea that the man he had just helped would soon become the reason his entire life changed. That night, Daniel reached his room. He opened the refrigerator. Inside was half a bottle of water and a few pieces of old fruit. He sat on the bed. His stomach growled again. Daniel laughed quietly. Well, Emily, I guess I kept my promise. He drank water and went to sleep. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a strange feeling. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was because of the dream he had. He had dreamed of Emily standing beside a bright window. She hadn't said anything. She had simply smiled. When Daniel woke, he found himself smiling too. Then reality returned. He had to work. He dressed quickly and left. But when he reached the warehouse, his supervisor was waiting. Daniel, we need to talk. Daniel's heart sank. The supervisor sighed. The company is cutting staff. Daniel knew what was coming. I'm sorry. Daniel stood still. You're letting me go? We have no choice. Daniel looked around the warehouse. The machines were running. Workers were carrying boxes. Forklifts moved through the aisles. He had worked there for 6 years. 6 years. And suddenly he was unemployed. The supervisor handed him his final paycheck. Daniel looked at it. It wasn't much. Not enough to cover his rent. Not enough to cover food. Not enough to start over. He walked home carrying a cardboard box containing his few belongings. That evening, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt fear. Real fear. What would he do? How would he pay rent? What would happen if he couldn't find another job? Would he lose his room? Would he end up sleeping on the street? He pressed his hands against his face. I don't know what to do. Then someone knocked on the door. Daniel froze. Nobody visited him. He opened it. There stood Samuel, the old man from the bus stop. Daniel stared at him. Samuel? Samuel smiled. I've been looking for you. Daniel was confused. How did you find me? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed Daniel a small envelope. This is for you. Daniel shook his head. No, please. I can't take money from you. Samuel smiled. You already did me a kindness when you had almost nothing. Daniel looked at the envelope. I only gave you $1. Samuel's eyes became serious. That dollar wasn't small. He placed the envelope in Daniel's hand. Open it. Daniel hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Daniel read it. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. 214 Madison Avenue. Ask for Thomas Reed. Daniel looked up. What is this? Samuel smiled. A chance. A chance for what? You'll find out tomorrow. Then Samuel walked away. Daniel stood in the doorway holding the note. The next morning he went to the address. It was a large office building downtown. Daniel felt nervous. He almost turned around. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. His shoes were old. His jacket had a tear near